everybody. Welcome to the channel. Today we have a special guest, Sandi Martin, and you might have seen her on our channel or on CBC Marketplace when we did sort of our review of the expose. So we reached out to her just to talk to another good person in the industry. So thank you very much, Sandi, for joining me. I know you're very busy, and yeah, thanks for coming on.
Oh, Kent, thanks for having me. I like
Yeah.
talking.
Good. Well, yeah, it's tough to be in this business if you don't like kind of hearing your own voice or whatever.
It'd be a bit of a challenge.
Right. So I thought my first question always is, maybe just tell me a little bit about your story of, I know that you were in the banking industry and then got out and went on your own. Um, is that the case? What happened?
Yeah, in the broadest strokes, I escaped from the banking industry after about a decade or so, peppered with I had three kids in that time. So my actual time at work in the bank serving retail clients was not the full 10 years. Um, but even, I mean, it really didn't take a huge long period of time in the bank environment, especially in retail banking, right? So you got core everyday people like you and me coming into the bank, may or may not have a relationship with them. You're just kind of servicing the things that they show up with. But it didn't take very long to hate it
Right.
with a burning passion. But I mean, I didn't have loads of money and I needed a job. So it took a little while to be able to actually effect my escape. Um, but then I went out on my own. I just started my own, all the stuff that I liked to be able to do at the bank and that you didn't have enough time to do because you had to get people in and out and whatever. Actually just having conversations about, what do you want and what do you have to use to get it? That was what I thought my practice would be. And I thought it would just be local people. I live in a very small town now. It has 13,000 people. Back then it had 11,000 people. And I thought, oh, I'll just be this local person that, works with people in person. And it didn't happen that way. And basically from 2 months into being on my own, not selling insurance or financial products of any kind, right? Um, I had a waiting list. My husband ended up staying at home with our kids instead of me. I mean, I was still here, but so yeah, and for about 5 years I was on my own, and then I partnered up with somebody for another 5 years. I mean, I guess I just like those kind of numbers because then after 5 years of being in partnership, I'm back out on my own again. So
Oh, okay.
yeah,
So you've been primarily fee for service since the beginning of you going on your own?
January 1st, 2013.
Holy, nice.
Yep,
Good for you. That's
yep.
it's a tough model to do, I find in the beginning because, like how do you get people that are willing to pay without knowing yet?
Yeah, oh,
What?
100%. But when I went out, it was at a particular time of personal finance blogging, which it was just a bit of a different vibe and era than it is now. So, and Rob Carrick was, I mean, he still does. He still talks a lot about fee for service. John Chevreau at Money Sense. They maintained a list back then, it used to be a free Money Sense list, and then it's changed. It's morphed over time multiple times, but it wasn't particularly difficult to say, "Yeah, I'm an advice only planner." We called it something else back then, but um, and then make friends with people who are online, and then have clients. But I also had the privilege of right. It took me a decade to get out of the bank because I was building up my ability to not need my income from solo
Hmm.
practice for about 2 years. So if we had needed my income, I wouldn't have been able to do it.
Yeah,
So
that was exactly like me. I tell the story I needed. My granddad had passed away, and there was a little bit of an inheritance, and I was like, this is going to give me a year and a half of a buffer of taking no money.
yeah,
And it was like a giant risk, right? But the best risk I ever took because it was like,
absolutely.
so at the bank, I love talking about the bank. So I want to get back to the bank. So you were a mutual fund advisor, I assume?
Yeah, yeah, I did the mutual funds and it's small town banking, right? So I did mutual funds, I did mortgages, I did estate accounts, I did credit cards, I did all the stuff. But in terms of licensing and investing, it was MFDA, it was mutual funds.
And then how did you get away with doing mortgages without, like, you're not allowed to even carry both of them, are you?
Oh, in the retail banking, you can do almost anything you want, Kemp.
I guess so. So you got a little bit sick of just being like, put 10,000 in your RSP and let me calculate your tax refund here and then your tickety boo and you're the best?
Oh, it was just like it. I have had good managers, especially I had a small town manager kind of once I was able to move back to my hometown. I had a manager who didn't. Do we swear on this podcast? I
Yeah,
don't think we
sure.
do, right? Do we? We
That's
didn't give a
fine.
shit. She was like, listen, we are here because the people in this town need banking services. And she was the person who took the heat with her managers when, we didn't quite get enough mortgage book, that kind of stuff. So there was a small period of time where I did work with somebody where it didn't feel like the grossest thing in the whole wide world.
Hmm.
But it was bracketed on both sides by just such a culture of like I like doing a good job. I like thinking that I'm doing a good job for the people who are in front of me, the clients. And then I also like to be able to go into my manager's office and say like, "Hey, I did a good job for those clients," and have them agree. But instead, it's if you do a good job for the client, if you talk about, oh, like if you do a debt consolidation loan for them, but you don't lend out any new money, it's just all the same bank money, and you don't spend any time talking about, oh, do you want a new credit card? Should we extend your like if you are doing the right thing for the client, you're in trouble with your manager. Is just the way it is. And it was constant double speak, right? Like, because in retail banking, you're constantly being told, we're here to do the right thing for the client. And oh, these managed mutual funds that they rebalance themselves, and 2.5% is a great price for that. And here's all the reasons why all the products we have are the best ones, and all the products at all the other banks are completely terrible, and nobody should ever give themselves their own advice. Like, and then on the other hand, you knew that if you went into your manager's office and hadn't sold somebody who doesn't need a credit card, you'd get in trouble for it. So I don't even remember what your question was. I just wanted to rant for a little
Well,
while.
that's all I wanted. I just want banking rants because I never actually worked in the bank and I only get to hear, like, it's all hearsay for me. So there was a bit of a difference because I was at IG when I started, and one of the things that we weren't selling debt. So
Yeah.
one of the things I always said is, it's a lesser of two evils because our goal was to try and get people at least to build up their assets and reduce their debt, not vice versa. And so there was sort of a good thing there.
Mm,
But I always hated like RC credits were like sales training. It
yeah.
wasn't, and it was like, which product are we pushing this month? We're doing this month and there's a competition to sell this product for whoever. And it was just, it felt, well, I knew I couldn't do a good job for people that had over X amount of money because I was like, they're paying a fortune for this. Like,
Hmm.
I can't provide enough value to make up for 2.5% in fees on $1 million. They're paying us 25 grand a year.
Yeah.
We're not doing that kind of work,
Yeah.
right? Like, and so it was hard. We've sort of morphed into a hybrid model of fee for service, flat fee, whatever, like, do you want us long term? Where I didn't like invoicing all the time. I was too lazy to be like, let me invoice you every year, especially on my own. I was like, I don't know. I just didn't want to do it.
Hmm.
I probably should have, but no regrets in the things that I did. My curiosity is how did you get on that CBC expose?
Oh, I mean, I know a fair number of journalists in the money sphere, and have for a decade. So one of the producers just reached out and said, "Hey, you used to work at a bank. Do you
Nice.
want to come on the show?" I actually thought it was background. So when Michelle, the producer, and I were talking about it, I was really just giving her, we had long conversations about like, well, here's what happened when I was in banking, and here are the kinds of questions to ask. And this is the kind of scenario that is probably, if you send somebody with a hidden camera in and then they say this about themselves, you're probably going to see some real crappy behavior. And then about 2 weeks before the recording date, she was like, "Okay, so we're gonna record on Thursday the X date, and we'd like you to be down here at the studio." And I thought, I don't I guess I was just oblivious. I didn't think that that was something that I was talking about, is actually being on TV. I don't enjoy that whole thing, but I am very grateful that they didn't use the part, the piece that they always use in those kinds of stories with, it's like somebody walking down a street or somebody walking down a hallway and looking very pensive, and that's how they introduce you. They have you walk down they didn't use that for me, so I'm
Well,
forever
that's good.
grateful. Thanks, CBC.
Yeah, I was in a movie once. I'd never aired. I think it aired in like Europe or something. I was in a movie as a stunt double, but I had a couple lines, and there was one thing where I had to do walking down a hallway and being like, "Hey," and they guaranteed how to cut it because I was like, I don't know how to act. I was the then I just got beat up by a UFC guy for like 3 hours for a $50 gift certificate.
Two.
Where
What
was
was the
the
gift certificate for?
to the restaurant the movie director owned.
Was it good? Are you allowed to say?
I
Did you have
didn't
to sign an
even
NDA?
know. I was there's no, I didn't. It was El Cortez. It's a good restaurant. It's just
Oh,
a, Mexican restaurant in Edmonton. You should have seen the bruises because they didn't want to rehire the stunt double that was union rates. And so they needed to refilm this fight scene. So I just got
sounds
beat.
fishy, Kent.
It was a cool day. You should see the bruises I had. It was stupid. Anyway, I hoped I would see the movie, but never came out.
Oh, the
So
graveyard of movies.
yeah, it was
Somebody's
too.
tax write-off.
Well, I mean, who knows? I don't know. They don't always get bought, right?
Mm.
So, but that's certainly beside the point of this conversation. But
We
I
can go in
was,
any tangent.
I'm terrible at TV too, right? I can sit in front of a camera that's in front of my face like this and talk for a long time. But so that comes back to kind of the bloggers and yeah, because that was my original idea too, was blogging instead of video blogging was,
Hmm.
and then my friends were like, no, 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 do like videos, tell these stories on video. Like, and I was like, oh, because I just thought I'd be like a blogger. Like there was a lot coming out at the time,
Oh, for
Canadian
sure.
Couch Potato, those guys before me, which, so that was sort of your sphere.
Yeah, it was kind of the tail end of that. Like Rob Engen had a lot of it sewn up with Boomer and Echo, right? And there was the mortgage people and the minimalist people. It was a cool little crew. There was even a little conference for a couple of years, and the first 2 years was really, like, it was good. It was just connections with real
Hmm.
people, and then it turned into something else, and it became very much like it was focused on the business of blogging rather than kind of and I don't want to say mission, because yeah, I had to make a living, but the mission of giving people unbiased advice.
Hmm.
And so, like, having left the bank, in part because I wanted to be crystal clear with myself that when I was telling somebody that they should save instead of pay down debt, I mean, I don't think I said that very often, but if for some reason that was the best thing to do for that person, I didn't want to have a feeling in the back of my mind that, like, oh, I just want that because if I have debt on my books and I have an investment on my books, things look better for me and my points or whatever. Um, so I was really, like, maybe hypersensitive to any potential conflict of interest.
Hmm.
And the tail end of that era of blogging, it was very much marked by everybody was doing, like, it was affiliate marketing and, like, oh, this month's roundup of what the best credit cards are. Well, who cares? The only reason you're putting this out here is because every one of those credit cards pays you money.
Right.
So anyway, so it felt very uncomfortable to be with it, to be in with a group was really trying to do a good thing. Like, they weren't trying to be nefarious or anything, but the business of blogging was the most important part of the conversation by the time that I kind of thought, nah, I don't need to be here anymore.
Right.
Um, rather than the business of aligning your
the
interests as an
business we're
advisor.
in, yeah.
Yeah.
So my
But it did
curiosity,
give me my start, so who am I to
well,
say?
perfect, right? And you got to, and it's hard, right? You're going on your own, like you just got to find a way, every way, right? Like it's not
Yeah.
like this is easy. You used to sit in an office and have everybody in a small town come and talk to you and trust you implicitly because you had that sign on the door.
Yeah, it's true. Oh man, the trust in small towns in their bank, eh? It was one of the things that didn't make it into that episode. I don't think. I think it was in one of like the taglines in the summary written piece, but like I just, if people had the concept of a bank as a money store in the same way that you walk past like the cash check or the check cashing place and whatever, like you have to have your understanding firmly in place when you walk into the doors of TD or CIBC or Royal Bank, whatever. You're going into a place that is designed to sell you financial products. It's a store for financial products. And then you can take anything, like, because when you go into Best Buy and you're standing there and they're telling you, oh, I think you should get this TV instead of this TV. You don't know necessarily if that's just the thing that they're telling you because they want to sell whatever it is. Same
Mm-hmm.
thing, that's you should have that in your mind when you're going into the bank. And sometimes I think that the marketplace setup is not like, why would they have to do the same story 10 years again? Like Preet Banerjee did one in
Yeah.
2009, I think was the first, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when Preet and I were talking about it over his whiskey cabinet, which is the most beautiful thing you've ever seen in your whole entire life.
Nice.
Like, it's just sad that I had to do almost word for word, the same story,
It
you
was
know?
pretty much identical,
Yeah.
right?
It's not, and it hasn't changed the only thing that's changed is that there are more products. Like, there are alternatives now. Like, there weren't robo advisors in 2009. And I don't mean to say that, like, that's the magic bullet or whatever, but there are a few more entrants into the kind of bank alternative options now than there were 10 years ago, but I don't think there's much more take up on them because people really trust their banks.
Totally. Well, and then they're all just owned by the banks. Anyway, back end
It's true.
wise,
It's true.
like it's like, because we're aligned with Modern Advisor and, because I know him very well over the years that we've worked together, and he's a great guy with the same idea I had, which was
Yeah.
just like, let's get people to understand that paying less should be advantageous, and then give people advice that they're paying money for, that they understand what they're paying for.
Yeah.
That's it. Are we perfect? Are all of our ideas the same? No, we're different. It's kind of like an art rather than a science in a way. Like there's
Mhm.
some math, but it's also like, I don't know, I feel a little bit differently about that strategy than somebody else. Doesn't mean theirs are wrong. If I knew which one was perfect, I would do it
Right?
every time.
That's right. It would be a different business model. It's also, I mean, advice giving as opposed to financial product selling is very much more, it recognizes that you're dealing with human beings in front
Hmm.
of you. So I have been encouraged to actually, like, for example, the CFP program, even the QAFP program through FP Canada is so much more focused now on like building up what they call like a therapeutic alliance with your clients. Not that we're therapists, we
But
know that line.
we kind of are.
But that's true because
I
when do
am,
people talk about their money except for with people like us?
when they're stressed about it, and I'm like,
Exactly.
then after most calls, I'm like, I didn't even really give you advice here in this one because we've already done the plan. I just reminded you that everything's okay. And then they're
Exactly.
like, thank you so much. That was worth every penny. And I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, perfect. You
Well,
know,
because remember, like again, back to the let's blame everything on the banks. So even let's blame things on product sales, blame things on capitalism, blame things on whatever you want. But we live in a culture where the expectation is that you have your shit together. And the thing we tell ourselves is everybody else does. And I feel like there are so many pieces to put together. I must be doing something wrong, and it must be something wrong with me. So
mhm.
anytime that we in our profession can normalize that, like, hey, no, not, it's impossible. It is literally impossible to be a modern human being, to be able to tick every single box, do every single thing well. And that's just in the area of finance, let alone hydrating properly and getting enough exercise, et
Right.
cetera, et cetera.
Exactly.
So every
And
time we
not,
remind people that, like, listen, here's the factor at which this is going to be a problem for you. If you don't do this piece of your life perfectly, it's material or not material. And if it's not material, let's get it out of our brains and you can worry about something else, or don't worry about things at all.
right.
So,
Yeah, I like that a lot. Because yeah, it's so much simpler than sort of one of the problems that we've encountered is sort of funny. So I mean, I've been teaching on YouTube for 9 years. I think most people that reach out to us have been watching for like 3 years. And then there's all these other guys out there now teaching good stuff.
yeah.
And so the clients that come to us are like very sophisticated with financial planning. And I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, I mean, I'm telling you stuff that I've already told you, just not directly to your specific situation. You know this. Whereas, like, I wish that I could go in and be like, give me every single client that works with that small town bank advisor or that, WFG guy, and I'll break everything apart in a second and fix it all.
Yeah.
It'll
Yeah.
take 10 seconds, but it's harder when it's like, well, I want like the perfect number drawdown of this and this exact time. And I'm like, well, that's not how this works, because tomorrow my assumptions are going to be wrong already.
Yeah.
Like the market changed, inflation changed. I don't know when you're going to die. I don't I don't know any of that, right? Like, we just have to guess. Uh, and so if you're looking 10 years down at a specific line item in your plan, I think that's a mistake too.
Well, and I think that is where we can help people who have spent a lot of time reading the books and watching the videos and paying attention. It's the same issue. It's what is important and what is not important to me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not to minimize if somebody wants to really, focus in on, yeah, the line item 10 years from now. It's not to minimize whatever reasoning they have behind it, because money is just a presenting problem, right? It's not actually the underlying thing. Um, so we can help those people sort out what's important and unimportant too. It's just different stuff.
Yeah, totally. So what I always wondered with, like, so you're fee only advisor that doesn't sell insurance, but you would be giving insurance recommendations in your plan, I assume, because it's one of the 6 areas of financial planning that are very important.
Oh
Risk
yeah.
management certainly is. So do you just outsource that and say like that and tell some advisor to sell them that exact product?
Oh, and it's the same with financial, like portfolio advice, right? We're never talking about the specific product. And the kinds of clients that I get the most joy out of working with, generally speaking, don't need a fancy, like, I shouldn't say fancy, but the highly specialized products that you have to be a real expert to know about. I don't get into that part. So
Mm-hmm.
my job is to tell people at baseline, like at bare minimum, you have to have this much life insurance because of everything you just told me. Like, so
Mm-hmm.
I've gone all the way in, I've gone deep into all the pieces. At bare minimum for you, you don't actually need any life insurance. I rarely
Mm-hmm.
say it that way. I usually say it might not be worth it for you. Um, but you do need this amount of disability insurance, for example, because yeah, you're right, you don't have any dependents except for yourself. And
Right.
you could, how many, sorry, this is total tangent, but the number of people, and I used to be one of them, who are like, yeah, but I just work on the computer, so I don't really need disability insurance. Your brain can get hurt, right? You're
Right.
using your brain. Anyway, total sidebar. Um, so no, I don't get as far as you need to buy this particular type or even term of insurance, but I do speak insurance a little bit, right? Oh, cats.
Yeah.
I kicked my dogs right out of the studio today.
I wish so.
Um,
Yeah. They they like to join.
Well, as they do. Um, but I do know some insurance folks that I have worked with in the past and that I have a good enough relationship with that I know if I could, where else is somebody going to get that insurance from? I mean, they have to work with an insurance broker.
Right.
I know that if I'm sending my clients to that person, my client who needs basic life insurance for X $100,000 or whatever is not going to be sold a universal policy that they don't need.
What do you mean? I was like, I used to joke all the time and be like, let's look at a client example and then be like, this wasn't at K4 and be like, okay, so what's the maximum income we can make off this person? You know, like, how do we, how do we take this and leverage it into like a leveraged loan and then getting them a credit card and then selling them this insurance and like because the first WFG plan I ever saw like that was a guy was and it was one of the only blogs I ever wrote that got any people listening to it was like I broke down like the 9 things that they told this client to do.
Mhm.
And the girl that told him was training. And she was being told by her superior, like it was like break your RESP that was they were like 14 years into like a group one that they would have lost all of it.
Oh,
Replace that $100 each a month with UL for the kids to fund their RESP at like 14 too. So
yeah,
like, I mean, what's that gonna be worth? $10 in 4 years when they need it to get out of that? The that was one of the worst parts that I remember, but everything was it would have cost him tens of thousands of dollars like in
yeah,
losses, right, to do that. And she would have made 7, 8 thousand to sell all that stuff. And he had, 50 grand,
yeah.
right? Like,
I think this goes to the point that, again, in a marketplace episode, what they really want to do is talk about the banks are terrible. And can you believe these advisors said these things? And yes, I'm sure there are definitely people kind of in our seats giving people advice under the bank system or under kind of any particular system that are being jerks, that are just doing the wrong thing for whatever reason.
of course,
I think there's far fewer of them than there are the people who need the job, who got very substandard training, or the kind of training that they got was just all about how it's basically indoctrination into the way that the bank wants them to think so that they can live with themselves when they sell people stuff that people don't need.
100%.
But like I remember not getting very much training in terms of what is actually necessary here. The kind of training that I got was how to sell stuff,
Hmm.
objection handling, right?
Right.
When you're doing that kind of stuff. So it's not, I hate the idea that the banks continue to be able to, or not, I say the banks, but you know what I mean, that the
Hmm.
worst parts of the industry and the richest parts get away with, well, it's a couple of bad apples or whatever. Like, oh, that's not TD's policy. We would never say that, which they're quoted in the thing. Because the box is rotten. It's not rotten apples. It's a
Totally.
rotten box. And you put good apples in it and they go rotten because the whole structure stinks.
Right. And then you're
Anyway.
handcuffed into a spot, I know how many people that are so unhappy in their position, but now they've got a good client base. How can they walk?
Yeah.
Uh,
It is a huge privilege to be able to walk away,
totally.
right?
I wish more would, right? Like it was the best thing I ever did.
Yeah.
Uh, I know everybody that's with me that was somewhere else before is certainly happier than, they were in the position they were in. Because we're just not, there's no push to one, compete against each other, to ruin more people's lives. Was basically kind of what it was. It
That's
was
you
like,
you've described the scorecard exactly.
right. Was just like build your points up, but you're rich. Like I go back to Wolf of Wall Street when he's like, "How do you sell this?" And he's like, "Because the money's better in my hands than theirs." And you're like, "Well, is it?" Certainly, I wouldn't be able to sleep at night if I got rich off of people that I was doing the wrong things for. I couldn't
It's
handle it.
no, but it's very easy to um again to for all the different cultural reasons that doing a good job is more important than whatever all the pieces that were kind of um crushed by every side about. But one of the worst things is, look, I have to pay my mortgage, and if I don't get this, if my boss tells me one more time that I'm not selling enough debt consolidation loans or credit cards or managed mutual funds, then I might lose my job. And that's really scary. And walking away is really scary. So here's the thing. I never dreamed of starting my own business. It
Hmm.
wasn't like, oh, I can't wait until I can be my own boss. I was terrified. I'm not an entrepreneur, I guess. I mean, I am now after a decade, but
Right.
uh, the risk was really big, and I ended up being able to take it anyway. But there's a lot of people that is just the last hurdle that they can't get over. And you're right. I want them to get out because I think they would be happier. I agree. And it would be better for the clients that they serve if everybody just quit one day,
100%. I
right?
mean, that's my dream is like, okay, K4 becomes, systems are good enough, you know, people are in place where it's like, if there's a mass exodus, we'll take you,
Yeah.
you know, and, we'll all be happy and work together to try and be better at doing this for, the millions of Canadians that think they're getting the right advice when they're not. I
Yeah.
mean, you know, and I mean, I think the kids might prove us wrong, but they don't have any money, right? Like of course they don't, because life is so hard for them, but
Yep.
they know, right? Like they know what's going on because they read, they check the internet, they see. But I mean, you're also 20, you want to take a risk and you want to do things like Bitcoin and day trading and whatever. So it's hard. It's a hard
Bless
fight.
them.
It's a
Yeah.
hard fight, right? I mean, it's but I mean, old people still do too.
Yep.
I've had to try and talk tons of people out of, you know, them wanting to take their whole nest egg and put it into something they heard about. You know,
But we created that culture. We, right? We created it. The idea of like, oh, it's that one trick,
one
right? If
win away, yeah.
everybody else is like, oh, this is one. I'm just smart. I just need to be smarter than everyone else in the room, and this crypto thing is going to do it, or whatever the thing is next time.
Hmm.
Mm.
But how many rich clients have you met that did it like that?
I met one client one time who, in 2008, sold his house. He had a lot of money. He sold his house, put it 100% in one bank stock, and he's extremely wealthy now.
Right.
And every time I talked to him, I was like, man, this is not, I can't argue against like banks never cut their dividend and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, I had one
Right.
client who did okay doing the most batshit crazy thing I've ever seen in my life.
Right. And I mean, it happens. But it's mostly stories I hear. They don't generally want to talk to you because they're like, well, I'm already smarter than you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I guess people self select to me because like money as the way to keep score of your success is
Hmm.
just generally speaking not the language that the people who I resonate with speak.
Me,
It's just right.
100%.
So
I
we
was,
don't, yeah,
you got enough to be comfortable. That's as successful as you need to be based
yeah,
on the lifestyle you want, which is a lot less than people think,
yeah. Oh, so often.
right?
It's actually usually it's one of the most enjoyable parts of my job is getting to talk to people who, because they haven't, it's just not the way that they think, it's not their area of expertise, they're experts in their own lives, being able to say, like, you actually have enough. Like, I'm sure you have this too. The number of people that come to us and say, like, "Ah, I think it's going to be another 20 years before I can retire," or "I'm really tired, I'm
Yes.
58, or I'm 67 and I just want to be done." And you look at the numbers and you could have been done 10 years ago.
Right.
You've done it already. But so many people come, at least to me anyway,
Yeah, us
with
too.
this sense of guilt, like, I made so many mistakes. I did
Hmm.
it so wrong. And most of the time we can say, "No, you didn't." I mean, well, maybe you did, but here we are right now. We can't do anything about that. But the look ahead, the glance ahead looks pretty good
Hmm.
based on the work that you've done so far, whether it was mistaken work or not. So,
Totally.
yeah.
Yeah, I find it happens a lot. I mean, because a lot of, like I said, a lot of our clients are fairly well informed. They're people that have wanted to learn. That's why they take time to listen to a slow talking monotone guy like me. And you know, they just don't see all the pieces coming together and being like, look how much that's going to create and look
Mhm.
how much you spend. And even if, you know, shit hits the fan, we're fine. You know,
Mhm.
like, oh my goodness, you got to cut down on something if something really bad happens. But that's a luxury you're probably not even, because you were already cheap, right? Most of the time, right? Like,
So often.
right. So I always find there's like two types of people. It's like, well, and both of them kind of made equal mistakes, in my opinion. Is like, okay, you didn't save anything. You blew it all. That was a big mistake. But you had fun, probably. Now you're stressed. And then there's the people that get to the finish line, and I'm like, you got 10 times as much as you
Yeah.
needed to have. That's also a mistake, because that means you worked too hard and stressed that much, and you're never going to be able to change getting out of that stress case. Like,
That psychological shift from, and no matter kind of which one of those kinds of people you were, or somewhere between, while you were getting ready to live off of your savings, that switch from it is good to put money into accounts and it is bad to take money out of accounts is very difficult to turn off.
totally.
So the number of people, and I'm sure you do too, right? The number of people that I meet with regularly to review, like, okay, well, we're going to rerun the stress test. We're going to rerun the projections. Let's, pregame your taxes before the end of the calendar year. Like, we have those conversations while they're in retirement,
Hmm.
like once a year.
Right.
And so many of those people, so many of them in those conversations, what I'm telling them is, you can spend more money.
I
You
know.
actually have to start spending more money
And
now.
then when they do, yeah, so I took down my McDavid thing because I put it in the basement, but I want to put like a world flag up behind there. My dad used to have one in his office. He was a physician, and he'd get his patients to send him postcards of where they went. I was like, I
Oh,
just
cool.
want you guys to send postcards of you enjoying your retirement.
Yeah.
You know, I'll pay for them, whatever. But like, just because, yes, please do spend this money. Life is short. You saved it all for whatever reason. You're mad at the CRA that they're going to take it at the end of your life. Well, spend it now then. Give it
Yeah.
away now.
Yep.
Help your kids now. Do whatever you want now, and watch them enjoy it too. I know
But
it's all the mental game
yeah.
of this is so crazy, right? Like, we trust the bank so much. We don't want to spend because we're worried about running out. We don't want to help too much because then there's entitlement.
Hmm.
Well, guess what? Really rich people have been entitled for 3, 4 generations. Right? Like, if you really want that was the point. My great grandfather didn't come here with money. It's been building up in our family for a bit of time. It's not like we're crazy, but we certainly have a step ahead of families that are just coming now,
Mm.
right? Probably less work ethic, right? Because they have to worry every minute of every day. But why do you want your kids to stress? Like, I don't know. That's my big push kind of is like, there's a lot of boomers with excess money sitting around and their kids in their 40s that are like, I'm working my ass off. I have 2 kids. We're struggling just to pay, these excess inflated costs. There's some help out there, I think.
Yeah, but there's a lot of fear too, right? Like we don't take care of each other as a society. We have minimum amounts. I mean, I'm happy that there's a social safety net. I think that's great. It could be better, especially for disabled people. Shout out to the Canadian Disability Benefit. Should have been designed better.
Yeah.
But I think people are not irrational to think, oh no, what if I need it later?
Hmm.
Um,
No, and I
it
mean,
doesn't mean I think it's the right thing to do,
I
but
would
I can see
never,
why.
you're right, but I mean, I would always be like, well, let's just cut that out. I don't mean giving it all away. Like, it's like, or just take kids on vacations and like enjoy stuff like family things, right? Like more of that and less of, the hellscape that we're in right now.
Hellscape we created for ourselves.
Which, I mean, in my personal opinion, is mostly due to the Canadian banking system.
I think it is
Uh,
a real problem.
it is, and that's my biggest fight, right? Is this
Mm.
system is not helping. And I mean, the best example I can give is watching COVID and what happened. It was very, very, very simple. We printed a whole lot of money to make sure people didn't starve to death. The people that couldn't work got, their basic needs met for X amount of time. Businesses didn't shutter. And in 1 year, $50 billion went to the banks.
Mm.
50 billion in profits. Their biggest profit ever. So all they did was took normal people's tax dollars, gave it to, the bottom, and it immediately went to the top.
Hoovered right up. I mean, some people might argue that we're not even in capitalism anymore, that we're in another state of feudalism with, 2 grocery stores, uh, 2 sugar makers, 5 banks, who are basically just one bank in a trench
One
coat,
bank, yeah.
right?
2 insurance companies left, maybe.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and
So,
then on top of that, I always like to look at like BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, which are one that own everything.
yeah,
It's
2 tech companies. It's just the time of monopolies. It
yeah,
doesn't have to be that way, but I mean, I think any of the things, banks are exemplary of that, but they're not. It's not the only place where it's happening. It's just silly.
I
It's
know.
just silly.
It's rough. It's what I'm afraid of. But I'm not afraid actually, because I'm like if this happens historically, and then it gets better.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, and we can live in a hellscape, and we can do the things we have to like keep the lights on and the house walls up and all those things. And at the very same time, we can live in a world of our choosing, of our creation, right? Like we can have like know our neighbors across the street, and we can take care of each other, and
mhm.
doesn't
I
doesn't have
thought
to keep
COVID
being this
taught
way.
us that when we slowed down for 3 months. It was the
Right.
most beautiful stretch of my life. It was my favorite summer of all time. When I
I
knew
know.
that the world wasn't going to collapse, I knew we probably weren't going to die from COVID. I was like so content hanging out with my son outside, going for lots of walks and bike rides. Work wasn't really that stressful anymore.
I
I knew
know.
we would be able to pay the bills and we weren't spending money on stupid crap. Costs like $10 a month to live. right? Like, and then all of a sudden it was just like, as soon as it opened back up, it just went into hyperdrive of like, let's maximize profits. And it was like,
Yeah.
why did we all do that?
Yeah.
I thought we had all learned, like, slow down, but there, I guess there was the people that had means that, bought their cabins and boats, and now it was sort of, I want my cabin and my boat.
Maybe.
I don't
Yeah.
know.
I think so. My friend Chris has a theory about the spiral staircase of experience, which is you feel like you're going through the same thing and learning the same lesson, but actually you're a little bit further up on the stairs. You're at a different point in your life. It just feels like it's the same lesson. And I think because you mentioned something earlier about the kids getting it, right? But they don't have any money. And I kind of think that if we think about like, humanity on the spiral staircase of experience, I think that it's not inevitable that things keep getting worse. We don't have to keep living in a hellscape that we created. And I think that it's just hard to see that from the step that we're standing on right now. But
Mhm.
I think we'll see it.
I do too. I mean, I just, unfortunately, I think it has to get a little bit worse than it is now in order for it. Like, the day I start seeing us climbing out of what I believe this hole is, I'll be happy. I'll be very happy when I can see that people are coming together in ways that are correct, which is, no, these monopolies, it's have to end, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's it. I mean, we went from 3 telecommunication companies to 1. The
Yeah.
only thing I remember from high school economics was monopolies are bad. And then you're like, oh, let's just no problem merge these two. Because, okay, so we have no competition.
Hmm.
That's perfect. That was exactly what capital, and then these giant companies that are just laying people off with their record profits. Well, who are, it's just a soulless thing, right?
Hmm.
It's not your local bank where you get to go in and talk to somebody in the 1950s. And I did a thing on this. I don't know where it is. We never posted it, but what's the guy's name? Pattinson or whatever. He's a billionaire in Canada. He owns car dealerships and radio stations and like signs on, advertisements.
Hmm.
And he came out and was like, if you raise our taxes, we'll just move. We will move. Like, and he's talking about him and his billionaire cohorts. And I'm like, where the hell are you going to go? You own car dealerships, advertising, and radio stations. Your 3 businesses can't move.
Yeah.
Your only customers are Canadians. Go move if you want. And then I looked at his story, and when he was 26 or something, he got to go into the bank and get a $50,000 loan to buy a car dealership.
Hmm.
A 26-year, I couldn't go into the bank and get a
No, in my
$50,000 loan.
40s. Um, that was the same rhetoric that was, right? Oh, you increased the capital gains inclusion rate above $250,000, and oh, you didn't even give corporations an exemption at all. We're going to leave. And there's actually really interesting research that says that people do not leave after their mid-20s or thereabouts, right? Because they've created family connections. And so they might pay more advisors and more, tax specialists to like move their money around. And now
Mhm.
suddenly it's based in like the Cayman Islands or something, and they have the money to do that. So it's in the best interest of the people who are the loudest talking about those kinds of things to like keep talking about them to make sure that they can keep earning their fees for the
Right.
shell game with taxes that they play.
Totally.
But people don't actually move.
No, and I
That's the
mean,
thing.
I've been looking at watching TikTok a bit on that, and like, there's some people that are like, okay, well, let's just talk about this and explain the capital gains, and then there's the other ones that are like, well, this is an absolute huge opportunity for insurance advisors to sell more, giant policies, and like, there's a few guys in my city that I know. Every time I talk to like a successful business owner, they're like, yeah, I talked to him and I did that, and I'd be like, man, the one of those pays like $1 million. Uh, whose best interest do you think that is?
Hmm.
Like, I'm not saying that there isn't a place, but I've seen some of them where I'm like, that's 10 times as much as they should have put into that.
Well, it's the hammer and the nail thing, right?
Right. Uh, and I'm like, I'll take 10% of every single one of those. I'd be a multi-millionaire. But nobody wants to hear from me because I don't drive around in a Porsche and tell them, like, you know, the sweetest things ever and never talk about the downsides of doing this, which are when shit hits the fan, all of those UL policies and PAR policies that people thought they could afford but were sold in their max income earning years
Mm-hmm.
are the first to go, and they fail. Fail. And, that's the insurance regulations in this country are just absolutely horrendous.
That's nonsense. Yeah.
And then we've got a countdown clock on the website about like full cost reporting, because I remember when CRM2 came out,
Yep.
and we were at IG and they're like, okay, everybody get in rooms together and talk about how we're going to talk about people seeing our fees. That was it. It wasn't like, should we lower them?
Oh no.
Yeah,
Oh no.
right.
This
It
is a
was
full circle moment.
just training. And then, but that gave them better hiding places
Mm-hmm.
with the fees.
Mm-hmm.
All it did was confuse people more and think they're paying less when, like, CRM2 was a blessing. Because then they switched to Series F and then they look like they're charging nothing.
Yep. And it creates, as we know, when you disclose something to somebody, it creates trust no matter what that disclosure is. So if you and I were, if I was thinking like, I'm going to get Kent to work with me. Well, Kent, I just want to disclose to you that every time that I say the word and, I take $10,000 out of your account. It's just the business structure. I just want to let you know. And that's a ridiculous example, but disclosing something and the way you disclose it matters, right?
Mhm.
It creates trust where trust has not been earned.
Right.
So it's not to say like, so then we shouldn't disclose. It's just like that doesn't solve the same problem. You're using that to cover a multitude of sins. And in fact, what it did was just create the same ones over again.
Yeah. It was, but I mean, they're sneaky like that. And somehow they don't have to set it up till 2027, which is mind boggling when they're like, okay, well, let's give you 4 extra years
Mhm.
to get your shit together on this. When it's like, you already know this information.
But the economy.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. Yeah. You guys are doing really bad. Well, and that the other thing, I guess, is should just do the math on like, okay, well, how much more does a bank make off a $100,000 loan than they do off $100,000 investment portfolio?
Mhm.
It's because they only have to pay one upfront sale to whoever sold it, and then they get to earn all that interest, where it's a lot lower than the fees they're charging on the mutual funds. So, of course, they're trying to sell debt.
Yeah, I started in banking in the heyday of well, one of the heydays of debt consolidation. And it was very like, if you were not doing a debt consolidation loan for every single person that sat in front of you, you were going to get a talking to. Like, oh, debt. Oh, yeah. That was a
But
long way of saying, yep, agreed.
right, crazy. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's probably, I now I want to talk to you again. I like you a lot. I mean, we just met we're cut from the same cloth, I think. I mean, we've just seen too much. I is the problem. We're a little jaded.
Yep, a
Um,
lot. I'm going to say a lot, jaded.
yeah, me too. People are like, why are you so stressed out all the time? I'm like, look at every look,
Eyes.
I have eyes. I don't need to read that. I can see it. I talk to people every day about this, and they're
Mhm.
very open and honest with me, even if they're not clients, because I ask questions that I know they've never been asked before.
Yeah.
And then they're like, oh, he actually understands that this is a struggle.
Hmm.
Uh, and then they're like, oh, now I am willing to open up and tell them the truth, which most people are very hidden with money, right?
Yeah.
So I know that, right? And so do you.
Yeah.
And, it's one reason why I've maintained never only talking to people with X, because I need to have my ears and eyes open to everybody. Um, because otherwise now I'm just and that was the other thing about K4. I used to find when I was in that sales business and I was at IG, and it was like, if you have money, I want to talk to you. And I started like going to parties and stuff and remembering how I would start to feel like I would be like judging people. I started to do it because the Kool-Aid was seeping into my bloodstream a little bit, where it's like, and I need to make a living. And I was like, I can't do that anymore. Like,
Yeah.
I cannot view people like that, like they're only important to me if they have X amount of dollars. It's the worst way to view the world. Uh,
It
it,
was the same way in banking. I had the exact same feeling of just like, oh, this is turning me into somebody that I do not like. I mean,
mhm.
I was in my 20s and I didn't like myself because I was socialized as a woman and we're told not to like ourselves. But I also had good reason not to like myself when I was in that bank world. So I like myself a lot better now.
Well, that's good. Yeah, me too. Yeah, I just stress for the world.
Mm,
That's my jaded, because I'm like, there's too many big things at play that, you go to war as individuals against giant. That's why I wanted to talk to you, because I was like, I know how she feels.
yeah.
And I love talking to people that feel the same way as me. We have, you know, we need to support each other a little bit more sometimes, because
Yeah.
it's a lonely fight every once in a while, right? Because even your closest family and friends will be like, well, what do you have a problem with the bank for? I'm like, what do you mean? What do you mean? Right? Like,
Why don't you?
right. Yeah. Like, one day, if we ever get news back, you know, like like, that's what Sean said. He's like, we need CBC because no other news organization in Canada would do that,
Mm,
because the banks are one of the only people that have enough money to pay for advertising.
yeah. Because they're monopolies.
Right. Yeah,
Full circle again.
yeah, totally. Well, that was great. Thank you very much, Sandy. Uh,
Well, thank you for having me,
Super
Kent. It
nice
really
to
was
meet you.
enjoyable.
I would like to chat with you again. Doesn't
Yep.
have to be filmed, but I'll certainly email you, and we'll chat again, I hope. And website, how can people reach you?
Well, they can reach me on my website, sandymartin.ca. I don't take a lot of new clients, so we can chat, but
Right.
I have two jobs now. So I work kind of mostly in advice only planning. I do it mostly by referral only or with existing clients.
Mm-hmm.
And then I spend the rest of my time at a community land trust. So
Oh, cool.
yeah,
Nice.
yeah,
Well, congrats on getting there. That's always a big step, right?
yeah,
Took takes a long time, but it's nice once it happens,
yeah.
The yeah, well, it was super nice to meet you. Thanks for coming on. Have a great weekend. And we were supposed to do 20 minutes, but I think we went a little over.
A tiny little bit. All
I
right.
mean, I'm sure you and I could rant like this for like 5 hours at least. I could.
We could
I,
do a rant-a-thon and raise money for something.
oh, that's a good idea. That's actually a really good idea, Rant.
It's yours. Take it.
That sounds good. All right. Well, have a good
Okay.
weekend, and
Yeah, thanks. You
we'll
too,
chat with
Kent.
you soon for sure.
Bye.
Bye.